before has the conservative movement been this unified around a governing agenda. Obviously, President Trump, our movement standard bearer, is going to make the decisions on what those policy priorities are, who the people are in his administration. This project is in service to him and to future conservative presidents.
That was the president of the Heritage Foundation. His name is Kevin Roberts. On the support Project 2025 has from everyone on the right, but especially Donald Trump. We're back with Isaac, Mark, John, and Vaughn. Vaughn, this is so inextricably linked to Trump, but we, I guess, already know he's started to distance himself from it because it is not popular with a lot of voters.
Right. He has made the case that he doesn't know who the organization is or what the document says. And I do not know whether Donald Trump has read the 900 pages or not. But we know that, of course, he does know the key architects of Project 2025. He spoke at the Heritage Foundation dinner in 2022, foreshadowing their work. For all intents and purposes, a good number of these folks could be very much at the heart of even his administration, like of Stephen Miller, who continues to serve as an advisor to him, as well as Project 2025. At the same time, Donald Trump would be the president of the United States, and he could use whatever he wanted out of Project 2025 or America First Policy Institute, the executive orders and other policies that they are coming up with. That group also consists of a lot of former allies. But for each of these organizations, they understand that Donald Trump can very much be a tool for them to ultimately execute on the policies that they have long sought to have be implemented. And so for Donald Trump, there is some separation, but I think that these organizations, including through this new report here, it is very clear that the organizations have every intention of being effective in 2025 in a way that they've acknowledged that they were ineffective in 2017 and 2018 out of the gate in coming up with policies and even personnel to wholly be able to operate the administration in an efficient way for 4 years.
John Heilemann, one of the things that has to happen, and it's fascinating because it's actually being led from cultural icons and cultural figures more than from political actors. Taraji P. Henson mentioned 2025. It's one of the most Googled political search terms. Is a case. A case must be prosecuted in front of the American people that the vast majority of Americans are opposed to everything on every one of these 900 pages.
Well, that's for sure. And I rarely ever want to take exception to anything Vaughn Hilliard says, but I will say that I will bet every dollar in your bank account, Nicole, that Donald Trump has not read 900 pages of this report. I do not mean to say that Donald Trump is not familiar with its aims or does not endorse it, or that his people have not worked on it, or that wasn't designed to allow him to carry out his vision. But I would bet, again, dollars to donuts, that Donald Trump hasn't read 900 pages in total in his entire life. He might not have read 90 pages in total in his entire life. That said, it is absolutely correct that on the cultural side, on the political side, on every side, when somebody lays out a vision for government that's this clear and this disturbing and this far outside the mainstream of what American voters want, it's imperative, absolutely imperative for all of those who are on Team Democracy, and I would say more narrowly in the context of a presidential campaign, on the part of the Biden re-election campaign, the Democratic National Committee, every part of the Democratic and progressive infrastructure, and the moderate infrastructure, not just the progressive ones, to try to raise the profile of what is in these documents and pin them to their owner. And that owner, despite, I'm sure, not having read 900 pages, their owner is Donald Trump. And I think it's one of the paramount strategic objectives for all of the allied opponents of the Trump agenda to make sure that no one in America on Election Day doesn't know what Project 2025 is and doesn't know who its papa is.
Papa. Oh, I love that. Someone said Papa, and it's not even 4:30 on Friday. Wait, I have an idea. It's dangerous, right, when you think of something on live TV, but let's just do this, Mark Elias. There's a story in the New York Times saying that some donors have paused their sizable multi-million-dollar donations. Why not start an effort to educate the country about Project 2025? Park the money there. I mean, it doesn't have to wait for any sort of anything else on the other side. And it feels like we have for Trump something we didn't have in 16 or 20. We have detailed plans of the monstrous policy agenda he intends.
Yeah, and I think we need to divide that policy agenda into two pieces. There is the substantive policies, which honestly I don't think Donald Trump cares about one way or the other. I suspect he's not even familiar, or if he is, he may agree or disagree with some of them. And then there are the process policies, and that's where Donald Trump sees the action, because the process pieces are what allows him to effectuate his desire to be a dictator, not for a day, not for a week, but to be an authoritarian ruler, that he can do whatever he wants and he can run government with his cronies in charge and have everyone in the executive branch at his beck and call. And he will go after his enemies. He will seek vengeance. He will unleash not just the Department of Justice, but, you know, Nicole, it will be the IRS, it'll be DHS, it'll be permitting. And he wants to be able to control government to be at his as a tool of his corrupt vision of America. And so should people be putting tens of millions of dollars into educating the population about Project 2025? I'd say no, they should be putting billions of dollars into educating the population about 2025. The fact is, we are facing an existential crisis of democracy, and there is not the organized, coordinated, well-funded, serious effort to understand that the other side is not playing a game of propaganda. They are playing for keeps. And their idea of keeps is to undermine democracy for a generation or more.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.